I'm hitting record. Great. All right. So, hello, everybody. Welcome to the call on my phone. I put a question into Slack, and so I would love to hear from you when you felt that you first belonged to a community. So, when did you first feel a sense of belonging to a group? And share with us. So I'm going to ping, because I can't see your face, to see whether or not you have that prepared look on. So I'm just going to assume, Beth, that you have an answer to that.
I'm always ready. I guess it was with my family. I mean, I'm one of 4 kids, and I've always had a sense of belonging that way. Youth group in church. Or are you talking more professionally?
No, I think any of those work. How did that, so I'm going to ask a follow-up question. What is it that they did or said, or how did someone else make you feel like you belonged, or how did you feel connected? It wasn't like, oh, you just get to hang out with us kind of thing.
I guess I would say then it was the finding my tribe at the Co-Starters Summit in Birmingham, feeling like for years I felt like I was an outcast and an instigator and a troublemaker as perceived by others, until I went there and found so many other people doing the same thing and having the same experiences.
Excellent. Go ahead and call on somebody. Oh, you can't. Can you see other people?
I'll call on Eric because I know he's here. I heard his voice.
See. All right. Yeah, so probably similar. I'll give like 2 stages. I think the first time was probably a sort of choir. I'm not sure if that was like choir or chorus, maybe junior high, but also related to that in church way back when. I think more recently, and kind of in this world, it was that similar thing that happened. I think it was before Startup Weekend became Up Global. They started, or around the time that they did that, they started doing these kind of big summits that were bringing together organizers for Startup Weekend, similar kinds of things. And that was probably the first time that I, got into contact with a lot of people who were bringing communities together around entrepreneurship and starting stuff. So that's my 2-stage answer. And I think, so I'll go to Jenny.
Awesome. I will also give a 2-stage answer. I think the first time was probably when I was in Girl Scouts. I joined a troop and we were all working toward a bigger goal of selling a bunch of cookies together, and we all were motivated to do it. And I think for me, like, that was in elementary school. It was something that we were all working towards together, and that was probably the first kind of community I felt really a part of, like we were all doing something as a whole. And then I would probably say later in life, I joined an incubator program when I first started the organization, and being around other social entrepreneurs and seeing that it was a bunch of people working toward making this world a better place, that I think that was the second part of in like my adult life when I felt that way. So there you go.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for sharing that. It's, I think what, I used the Verna Myers quote, which ended up on a video about being in, so diversity is being invited to the party. And so hang on. So diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And the third part of that is belonging is dancing like no one's watching. And the feeling that we get from doing those things are really important. And I think some of the messaging around some of this inclusive stuff is really about how we create that for entrepreneurs and how we create that for fellow ecosystem builders. And so I want you to think about some of the ways that people help to make that happen, so that maybe what we can do is, as we build out these tools or initiatives, to grow the field, that we incorporate some of that in there. So the three initiatives that are being raised up as a good starting point for the inclusive field is diverse NRP leadership, so national resource providers. So obviously organizations that have a wide-reaching audience, a wide range of perspectives are important. And we talk about the reasons for why you need diverse representation. Ecosystem Building Speakers Bureau, and a fellowship, so Ecosystem Builder Fellowship. So those are the three initiatives that we're going to be focused on. Now, Beth and Eric know some of this, having been on a call recently with Andy. So I'll share with you, Jenny, that what we're looking at for part of the summit is probably more of a Startup Weekend hackathon model, where we're going to put together some canvases about what a pilot project would look like, the elements that we need, and part of that needs to be housed in a national resource provider. You are, I guess, I mean, for the scope of things, you are potentially a national resource provider, right? Because you look across the country at the challenges of people who are different. So do you prefer the term different able, or tell me, I don't want to put words in your mouth, so
Yeah.
share with us how you describe that.
Yeah, we use the term people with disabilities. It's, that's the technically political correct term, although people with, there's a huge surge in the word neurodiversity within the especially autism world, people saying they're neurodiverse. But people that are differently abled is not something that is not a poor way to put it either. So it's just, people with disabilities, technically the simplest way, I would say.
I appreciate that. I think I had this discussion with my son who tends to be a deep thinker, and one of the things that he said is, if somebody doesn't have the ability to see or hear, that is, they're not able in that way. So disability is not a slant or a way to look down on somebody. It's saying that something that is, I don't want to say working, because that's but they don't have that ability, which makes it disabled.
Mm-hmm.
Not, it's not like you're less than, you're just, that part isn't functioning the way that it does in average human beings, right? So so I want to be really mindful of that, and I think different abled or some other things like neurodiverse absolutely makes sense, right? Because you're using other parts of your brain in a different functionality, but the abilities themselves, like seeing, hearing, whatever, those are things. And I think that sometimes we think that we're being politically correct when you're actually not being scientifically, I don't know, using the terminology.
Totally. So for me, I love that you're talking about this, because I think a lot of people are nervous to talk about people with disabilities because they don't know how to refer to them a lot of the time, and they want to be respectful, and it's totally always out of respect. So the politically correct terminology is people with disabilities, and that's built off of person first language. So putting the person before the diagnosis. So not saying a deaf person, but saying a person who is hard of hearing, deaf or hard of hearing, is actually the politically correct way to do it. Although there are many people who prefer to be referred to in a different way. So I always ask the person, kind of, if I was talking to a specific person, like how they preferred to be, talked about, or how they prefer to be addressed. So there's a lot of people who identify with being autistic, and they like to say, I'm an autistic person. However, the first thing you should, if you don't know, I would say person on the autism spectrum or person who has autism is technically the way you should initially do it. But if it's someone's preference, then I always would alter my language. The other thing that we use a lot when in how we talk about our students is self-advocates, is a terminology that is used a lot in the disability community, that they're advocating for themselves. So calling them self-advocates is something that's also on the rise. So I appreciate you asking that question, because I think it is a barrier to including people with disabilities in the conversation, is just the fear of not being able to address it in the correct way. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. I think it's important, and one of the things that that we try to do is maybe, well, Eric, I always invite Eric in to be comfortable in the discomfort, and he's really good about doing that. I think it's important for people who would like to be allies to understand that it's messy and complex, and you know, and we can't shy away from the conversations. I think that we've shied away from conversations far too long, which makes it very awkward to talk about things. So thank you for sharing that and expanding our perspective. So I see Ben joined us. I'm going to put you on the spot, Ben, and ask how you're arriving today. We've kind of talked about how people feel like they belong.
Yeah, good afternoon. My apologies for being late. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. So I'm just catching up on the prompt again, sorry. How we're arriving today?
Well, there was a different question I asked, which was, when was the first time you felt like you belonged to a group?
First time I felt it belonged. I'm not sure if I can pivot slightly from that, from a conversation I was just having earlier today related to some conversations of inclusion. I distinctly remember the first time I remembered being part of sort of the majority group and recognizing that. And that was when I moved in first grade to a new school, and I was alone on the playground by myself as the new kid in school with one other person, and someone who ended up becoming a very close friend. But it wasn't until much later that I realized I was alone because I was the new kid in school, and he was alone because he was the single African American in school. And it, you know, I very quickly was able to change my status as the new kid in school. Perhaps obviously, you know, he almost never able to change his status as the lone African American in the school. So I'm not sure if that exactly answers the question, but it was something, you know, sort of adjacent to our broader conversations here, and that has been on my mind in the last 24 hours as I was recounting that story and sort of its impact on me recently.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Eric, can you hear us?
Yes, I do. What about you guys?
Okay, good. So Eric, share with us, if you will, like the first time you felt like you were part of a group. Like, how did that sense of belonging?
Wow, it's like one of those chair at the table moment, right? When you feel that they include you. Probably already at an adult age, I think you're included in tables or in groups, and the good ones, because you know they're bad ones. And once you have certainty of matureness, I think, or when you can give something to the group, when you're truly, I think, trustworthiness, loyalty are those things they see to get you in. At my first formal job in finance, at a securities broker dealer, which is some kind of a wolfy environment, I was given trust. And the funny thing is, I had no idea about the industry and all of that. And some of the people within the group told me, be careful, because there's really no friends in this industry. But I did found friendship and mentorship, and I think that was the first time I was included. I was given responsibilities that I I was probably 25 years old, and I could remember saying, "Wow, like I'm on the big leagues." So I think that was the first time, and then after that, of course, a couple of times in jobs. I think in jobs is the first time you really feel being part of a group. In school it's different, within the family it's different, because there's other ties. There's other. It's kind of a set group, but in a job group or in a work group, it's or in a, I would say, a group with a specific goal, without anything in reward, it's harder to get. So yeah, I think that was the first time I was included I was given a chair at the table, per se.
I think that you've touched on a couple of really important points. We talk about trust. We talk about being given some leeway, some latitude, some responsibilities, and how that creates that sense of trust. In the book that I totally geek out on, which is The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, he talks about when people are vulnerable, it creates a sense of trust. We always think that if you create trust or you extend trust, that people will be vulnerable with you, and it's actually kind of the reverse. If you show yourself as vulnerable, so an organization like a company is going to offer you the opportunity, right? So they're being vulnerable and exposing themselves to a chance of something not so great happening. And so they're empowering you to be able to impact positively, right? But
Right.
they have to extend that in order for that to happen.
Wow, very interesting. Culture Code. I'm gonna read it.
It's a wonderful book, and so he did a presentation here in Tulsa a couple of months ago, and he talked about how when things are flowing well, that hopefully, like this with ecosystem building, that we're gonna be able to ebb and flow. Like, has anybody ever watched martins, the bird? There's a flock of birds. They eat, I guess, mosquitoes or bugs. And you can see them sometimes at dusk. It's a big mass of birds, and they just kind of swoop around. So there's no leader. It just, like, one will change directions, and then they'll kind of follow. And none of the birds collide into each other. They just kind of take a notion from a different bird, and then they kind of flow together. So it's the most amazing thing to watch. One of these days I'm gonna, I watch them once in a while as I'm driving down the highway, and I think I'm gonna pull over one day and videotape them, because that's the beauty of it. Maybe I'll just share some martin video in a Slack channel or something. But thank you for sharing with us about the trust and vulnerability and all of those things that need to happen. So what I was trying to circle back to in this conversation is how to think about how those organizations or the other people helped inspire that with you. Like Jenny talked about Girl Scouts, right? There's something about wearing the same uniform, having a shared vision or mission, like selling cookies, right? We all wanted to sell cookies. We wanted to sell a lot of them. How do we work together to make that happen? So as we talk about these three initiatives, which is the diverse leadership in national resource providers, the Ecosystem Builder Speaker Bureau, and Ecosystem Builder Fellowship, how can we ingrain some of these things that we felt into these programs because they're going to need that for them to be successful. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. It's that endpoint philanthropy that you awaken them as well. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So think, Beth, you were with me recently at the Tom Tom Festival. And I don't remember, I don't know if you remember that we asked what you would like to speak on.
Yes.
So, so I wanted to share as there's a common thing, especially when we talk around diversity, that we tend to pigeonhole people of color to talk about diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to be really intentional about that. So if you were at the Tom Tom Festival, we had a cis white hetero guy on our panel. And because a cis white hetero person who is able-bodied is also part of the ecosystem, right? So having a perspective isn't just about parading people that look like your identity. So Beth, do you remember that panel? Were you in the room when we did that one?
Absolutely.
So what was there anything that stood out about the people that talked? And can you share with that? Because I think that it was a surprise to a lot of people that we included John.
I thought it was genius to include him. And it really, I think, brought home without saying it, but you did talk about it. It just really brought home that inclusiveness is important for everybody. So that was fantastic. The other thing that really stuck out for me from that panel was Faye's conversation around the fact that, and I've been talking to a few people around here about it, is the Black-owned businesses died when the whites accepted the integration because it was the new bright and shiny. So while the Black people went and grew the businesses of the white people and to the demise of the Black people's businesses. So the connotation that integration is key has always been on my mind, but because I think of, people are just people, but she alluded to the fact that Black people want to build up the Black communities and be in their own cultures. And so that was a news to me and something very interesting and a different way to look at it.
So let me expand on that, and I'd love to get some feedback from others. So what Beth is talking about is Faye Horwit, who you will meet when you come to eShip. I'm hoping everybody signed up for eShip. When Faye talked about Black-owned businesses cater to Black customers because they were in the communities where Black people lived. So when you're in the community and you go to the dentist, the doctor, the lawyer, the grocery store, you support those businesses because for quite some time, they were not allowed into white neighborhoods. They were white-only businesses and white-only access. And then with civil rights and integration and gentrification and all those things that happened, what happened was now Blacks could go to frequent businesses that did not cater to them originally. So this was brand new access for them. And because they were able to access, they wanted to pursue the opportunity to be in the world that they were never allowed in before. And that was the demise of some of the businesses in their own communities because now they were crossing the lines that, the red lines and whatever was put in place before. So I'm curious if anybody else had heard anything about that. Ben, are you familiar with any of this, or does this sound like something really foreign and new?
Sorry, am I off mute here? Not foreign and new, but I'm learning every day that we get more involved in diversity, equity, and inclusion work. So, my colleagues who help lead our programs are much more intimately familiar and speak this language much more. This, to the extent I've been able to participate on the C-SHIP group, for me is an opportunity to learn more deeply. So.
Eric?
Hey. Two Erics, yes. Which one?
You.
So the other thing, so I actually hadn't heard that. That's interesting. It's not. I guess it sort of makes sense. The other thing that I heard that just came up kind of the other day was one of the responses to integration or to being able to sit at a lunch counter, et cetera. It was a lot of sort of the white businesses moved from downtown to suburbs. So basically a lot of movement away from those markets. So it's sort of like a double whammy. It's not be careful what you wish for, but there are consequences, unfortunately, it seems, anytime that the ball moves forward in terms of making things more inclusive, that for lack of a better term, sort of the white male patriarchy kind of reacts in a way that continues to assert itself and make things unfavorable to other groups.
I think we have a tendency to always focus on that systemic thing, and sometimes we need to recognize that it's not supposed to always be this way, right? Like, because it's the norm doesn't mean that it needs to stay that way, and I'm reminded of that a lot when we talk about being an extrovert as opposed to being an introvert, and we're extra normative. We think that when people are shy and they don't talk, that's bad behavior or not as favorable as people who are outgoing and bubbly. Right. So that's interesting. Jenny, I'm curious to hear from you because you're focused on the inclusion piece as part of your main focus and work. What is the best way to be an ally for you?
That's a kind of a loaded question. I think there's a lot of ways. I think I've said this on the call I was on last time, but I think a lot of times when we talk about diversity, we don't include people with disabilities in that group that we necessarily think of. And I think a lot of they're not the top of mind when we think about diversity and inclusion. Hopefully that's shifting. So I think, when we're talking about being an ally, recognizing that there is a huge population in the U.S. that has a disability. It's actually 1 in 4 adults in the U.S., which is over 61 million Americans. And it is so differing. I think that's just being able to say, that this is a group that we need to talk about and think of. And I think that's the easiest and first best way. I think, again, not feeling scared to ask and talk directly to people with disabilities about barriers that they're currently encountering. I think opening up different doors that might not have been there before, and being okay to say, like, I don't really know if a person with autism shows up to my program or to my business and they want a job, or they want to learn how to start a business. I don't know how to do that, and being okay with saying, I'm working on this and I want to figure out the answer. I think kind of admitting that we don't know what we don't know, and working side by side is the best way to be an ally, because I don't think historically there have been very many opportunities available to people with disabilities, especially I can speak a lot from my family perspective. So my brother's on the autism spectrum, and he was told that he could go work at a grocery store and bag groceries, and that was kind of the best. Or he could be a janitor, or he could be in these areas where he's that's historically where people with disabilities have been placed in jobs. I think just being okay with not making any assumptions. So I have one of our students is very social, and she's on the autism spectrum. She loves being around people. She might not say very much when she's around them, kind of what you're saying with introversion versus extroversion, but she loves being around people. But first job she got, they put her in a file room because they thought, oh, she's on the autism spectrum and she doesn't want to be social. But she loves being social. So just being okay with, admitting what we don't know and asking the questions directly to people, I think is the best and easiest way to start being allies and learning from the people with disabilities and what their needs are, I guess.
Thank you for that. Does anybody have anything else to share about how to be an ally to you in particular, or the questions that you want to ask about? Because this, I'm hoping, this is supposed to be the place where we work those things out, right?
This is Ben. I'll posit to this group a dilemma that I've been working with. My camera is not on. I don't remember if it has been in the past. I'm a 38-year-old cis white male who's passionate about, but as I acknowledge, working to learn this space. But my privilege in it struck me, and sort of my allyship recently the other day. I was asked if I'd be interested in joining, essentially like a social society here in town, one that has a long history, including a history with roots in sort of quelling racial rebellion and certainly not inclusive in any way kinds of roots. It's become, just sort of a high society kind of society with some minority membership. But it really struck me as I thought about, what does my allyship look like when, 2/3 of my daily work and conversation can be in the space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And yet in another third or otherwise of my life, I could be approached to join something like this that historically at least has had very different connotations. And that for me was a sort of really a stark realization in charting a course for, what does it mean to be an ally? Do you, not to be so crass, but do you say, double middle fingers in the air to you and your society that is not the way that I am or that we could or should be, or do you maybe join under conditions or work from that position of privilege inside to try to make cultural and or individual changes. And so it's sort of an ongoing struggle, not struggle, that's incredibly the wrong word, but an ongoing, sort of internal dialogue for myself on, how do you live allyship in that place of privilege?
I think that's really important. I'm curious to know what others think about that. Would you join if you were Ben, or just being you?
I think I would, because I would go in there with the clear strategy to change that perception, if it still exists, and change the activities that support that perception. And I would look for allies in that strategy as well. Because if you don't get engaged, then it's going to stay the same, right?
Go ahead, Eric. Or would you join?
It's really, I mean, it's the thing that, I'm not sure. It depends. I think the thing is that those of us who kind of recognize how much privilege we might have in different points, it is a privilege to be able to make those kinds of decisions, to number one, be invited, and then have a process that we can go through to say, yeah, this is going to be worth my time or not. So budgeting how much of that gets used on these things, I think that's, really situationally dependent. But I appreciate the way that Ben's working and looking through this, because I do agree that, there are groups, many groups, and many people who, if they're not, talking with a bunch of folks and getting other perspectives, they're not going to change. So, so it sounds like it's a formidable challenge, but a valuable one to maybe take on. So, I appreciate you sharing that, Ben.
Eric, would you join a group that didn't align as much with your views, or historically had issues?
Absolutely, yes. It's just, closing all the self-centeredness window and opening the humble one and start listening, because I believe that in order to change a heart, you have to break it first. It's tough, it's hard, yeah, it's not comfort, but if you're willing to do that, you're also should be able to be open for others to do that to you. So yeah, I like taking risks to kind of measure it first and then mitigate it. But if you don't even take the first step, absolutely yes. Yeah.
Great. Jenny?
Yeah, I somewhat encounter a lot of similar dilemmas because I'm invited to speak on behalf of people with disabilities a lot in different scenarios, and I am not a person with a disability. So I often grapple with should I ever be a voice for this community? But I think because it's not my story, I think a lot of times, we walk in and people think that asking me to be on a panel is diverse. I'm a white woman that's does not have a disability, but I can speak to a community because they're who I work with every day, and I'm a sibling of a person with a disability. But I do think it's hard because I think the way I always look at it is I'm hopefully opening a door that could or that could in the future be open to a person with a disability, that maybe next time they're asking someone that's not me, but someone who actually does have a disability to fill that role, and trying to, open those doors and encourage that conversation around what kind of doors can we open if we do, if we are invited to the table and we can have those conversations, what kind of notions can we be challenging and encouraging people to see things a little differently from, our perspectives, because you did get the chance in the first place, and most people wouldn't have that opportunity to start out with, I think.
No, absolutely. And I think, Ben, go ahead.
I was just saying thank you, everyone, for your thoughts on that. I think as you describe it, each individual here, the considerations, you're going to say, that's very much the kinds of things that I've been wrestling with. And what is the opportunity? What is the obligation? What is the chance to maybe bring people alongside this is certainly a new experience or a new opportunity in allyship, for lack of a better term, than I have experienced before. So I appreciate the chance to talk through it here.
So I think it's really interesting because I'd be curious to ask the person who asked you to say, why did you ask me? Do you know from knowing me that I'm a good candidate? Why did you think I would be a good candidate for this? And maybe part of the reason that they asked you is because 2/3 of your time is spent thinking about these things. And so you would be able to add that perspective. So that's an interesting question. Allyship is also about being in the rooms that some of us can't access. So for Jenny to be at the table means that, there's an obligation and a responsibility that she's tasked with. I have a friend who is a cis white hetero Christian male, who is a diversity inclusion officer at a major oil and gas company. And I said, I envy you sometimes because you can say some of the things that I can't say. If I say them, I'm an angry woman or I'm an angry brown person. But you can say them and call people out. But also coming with that is a great responsibility because you have to speak for us. And I also hear from Eric and my, mutual friend Vanessa, like, I'm tired of schooling. So you go and do the homework, because she's tired of saying the same things over and over again to teach people what their perspective is. Like, go and do your homework. If you want to know what it's like, read a book or listen to a podcast, or there's information out there. So some of it is putting responsibility on them, on ourselves, to actually do the work to try to understand. So there's all kinds of things going on. And the other thing that I try to be gracious with is people don't know what they don't know. They don't know because they're modeling the behavior that they've only understood to be the way to do things, right? So I've talked to some of you in the past. I have a challenge with a local community czar who happens to be like gatekeeper towards having open ecosystems. So my challenge has to be, okay, so do I talk to them about it? Because that's the only behavior that maybe he knows from being around the circles that he's in, right? He doesn't know any differently because that's all he's exposed to. So maybe assuming that your actions are not your intentions. So we judge ourselves by our intentions and we judge other people by their actions. And we don't sometimes understand that their intentions aren't to be malicious and gatekeeping and exclusive. It's just the only thing that they know. So some of those things are important to think about. I guess I spend a lot of time thinking about these things and trying to figure things out, but we all misstep, and to be able to say, hey, calling out your friends or calling in your friends when they do that, I think is really important, because sometimes they just don't know. So Eric, when you, I'd love to have you share a little bit more about Vanessa and what she does and the role that she plays in your ecosystem, because I don't think people know her, and we're hoping, I think she signed up for the summit, so I'm looking forward to having her come. So will you share with us?
Sure, just a little bit maybe. So one of my colleagues is Vanessa Roanhorse, who actually, she's kicked around the country a little bit, but she landed here in New Mexico, and she's Native American. She's been working on a few different projects with our economic development department. I actually work for city government, although I've been kind of on the community side before myself as well. And I think, I'm not sure what else to share, but she's been involved with a lot of different things around representation and Native American community, not just in Albuquerque, New Mexico, but sort of nationally and occasionally internationally as well. And I just it's important to just have, as we talked before, have the folks, to the extent that they're I don't know, willing or want to. She just brings her perspective, I think, forward in a much more authentic way. And also, what is it? Nothing about us without us kind of thing. So we've kind of had those conversations around a lot of different initiatives that we've been close to. And, folks are trying to help this group or that group, and their leadership teams or the people who are putting the projects together don't include folks from that background, and just how frustrating, I'll put it that way, how frustrating that can be. So this is a very, very lame introduction. I hope you'll have a chance to meet Vanessa at eShip. She's kind of her own force of nature, but just it's been really, really good and useful to be talking with her around a lot of the ecosystem issues we have here. And also some of the things that she's seen, that we've each seen around the country. So it's good to have folks in your, close circle where you can talk just plainly and share problems and say, hey, I think there's this issue I want to talk about, and maybe I can use some help, things like that. I don't know. I'm not sure what else to share.
No, I think you did great. I think it was fascinating to hear her share with me what happened at Native Women Lead, and that so she had a summit about a month ago, and one of the things that she mentioned, when you think about Native women, I guess there's like the perspective of Native American women, and then maybe you include like First Nation people from Canada, but she had people come from Ecuador and other countries. So that's not necessarily what I thought of top of mind when I said, you have a call out for Native women, but it's really important to think about. So I think expanding our interpretations of what that looks like. So in the time remaining, I wanted to see if anybody had any questions or comments or something else that they'd like to share, or have any questions about eShip or what's coming up.
Yeah, this is Ben, and I apologize as I came on late, so I might have missed some of this. Just the context of eShip and the actual gathering here in a couple of weeks, and how, if we know how or if this group will be convening or translating our conversations further. I know you've been working on the brief, is that what it was called, and the dashboard, but just curious, as we show up in Kansas City for eShip, how do we best show up in conjunction with this goal group? And I apologize if that was covered in the portion I missed. I could follow up offline if necessary.
No, I think that's a totally appropriate question. And since Beth had to jump off the call, I'm going to see if Eric will help answer that.
I've got a related question that I'll ask as well. Okay? I'm just trying to make sure that I wasn't muted. So getting close to a pretty good schedule. There's sort of a draft schedule that a couple of us have seen pieces of. One thing I'll mention is that one of the preceding, and if you have signed up already, I believe this was part of that process, there will be an unconference that helps. I'm looking at it as sort of tapas or dim sum, or some kind of an appetizer kind of thing. Not a whole meal, but just some opportunity for folks to, as an unconference, to identify topics that they think are important to share with the group. So it's an opportunity to have a sort of a value added connection and introduction to a lot of different people from throughout the community, since it's just an amazing array of folks with different talents and experiences. So just to be able to share, a few of those in 20 or so minutes, I think that's a really good opportunity. So I'm one of the people that's helping with that. I know on the books, there's 2 different sessions related to the goals. And my question for this group is if there's any pre-work related to what's been written up already that we should be looking at, or if we're just kind of like, read up on your stuff, or prepare something for an unconference or that kind of stuff. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Eric. That's exactly what I was hoping for, that you would share about the unconference. So when you convene 450 ecosystem builders from across the country and parts of the world, there's an opportunity. I know that, as many of you may know from having attended previous eShip summits, that this is a working conference. It's not about sitting back and listening to people talk about stuff and talk at you. It really is about engaging you and tapping into the ability for all of us to work together. I also want you to think about eShip Summit as just a point in time. This is not the be all and end of all for our work. It is just merely a point where we get together and work towards something, and then we go off and we still continue to work towards something. As Victor Huang says, this is 20 and 30-year work. We're not going to solve for it by the next summit. So, and whether or not you're going to be there, the work will continue, right? You'll be part of the work as it evolves. It's a nascent field, and we're early adopters and practitioners. So since the last eShip Summit, as you all know, we've identified 7 goals. This is goal number 1, because whatever we work on still has to infuse an inclusive, diverse group of people. Out of 130 plus initiatives that have bubbled up as, hey, if we had this, we could move the field of ecosystem building forward, we've identified 30 as a good starting off point. Does that make them better than the other ones? No, not necessarily. This is simply a good starting off point. So under these, there are 3 initiatives. You can find them in the beta dashboard, which there should be a link in on the Slack channel, and where you can look at it a little bit closely. So the plan is that we would come together and have an opportunity to be introduced to some national resource providers. These are other organizations, foundations, people that look at it on a field level. Remember that at this point in time, it's things that we're looking at to expand a field of ecosystem building or ecosystem builders. So you're going to be introduced to a handful of our 70 plus national resource providers that will be there. So you get to learn a little bit more about what they do. Think about what they do and the initiatives, and the goal is to partner ecosystem building practitioners, such as all of you on the call, with national resource providers, which are the nationwide focused people that support some of these initiatives, and partner together with an idea and create a pilot. So think of it as like a hackathon, startup weekend, where we'll look at a canvas, find where your energy goes, work on that thing, and come up with a pilot or beta program, which will work towards a funding model. Okay, so that's what we're striving for. As far as the brief, I'm actually working on an even briefer brief. So those canvases, that initiative canvas that Eric and others have helped refine and written up, those are basically your templates for the work that's going to be done. So what you want to fill out is that. The one modification that we've added to that model is the sustainability piece, because knowing that the Kauffman Foundation is really great at convening and bringing people to the table. They don't own ecosystem building, nor do they want to. Their role, because they can, so they must, is to be the conveners that gets all of us together in the room, right? What happens, and this is the problem, the pain point, the challenge of a lot of startups is, what do you do afterwards? Like after the initial funding, how is it going to be sustainable? How do you scale it? How do you sustain it? And the part of the answer that we think we've come up with is that if it lives with a national resource provider, right? If Startup Champions Network creates a database of ecosystem building speakers from diverse perspectives, like just because they have it doesn't mean that anyone else is excluded. It means that that's a good point to go to when you're looking for a diverse speaker, right? Is it the answer to everything? No, but it's a good starting off point. So then they could sustain it and perpetuate it for hopefully eternity, or as long as this stuff makes sense. So it's not something that Kauffman funds, and then after the funding runs out, that it's over. So sustainability is a really huge part of this. And as I've said in the past, and Andy said from stage, we don't have any of the answers. Like, all of us have parts of the answer. So what we want to do in this point in time, in the next 3 weeks, when we come together, is to tap into everyone's brain and have that. So does that make sense? Okay, great. Are there any other questions? Thank you, Ben. We'll see you at the eShip Summit. Does anybody else have any questions or anything they'd like to add? Wow, you guys are easy today. So, so it's 3 o'clock, and I guess what we'll do is I'm going to ask you each for a word to wrap up the call. So, give me a word, Eric.
Boisterous. I don't know why it popped into my head. I've got to see my kids in a little bit here. I'm a little pumped about eShip in general. So it's great to meet a couple of new folks or a couple of folks who are new to me who are part of this conversation. Thank you. I'll hand it off to the other Eric, since it's so rare that I see another Eric around here.
Yeah. Well, I'll say sustainability. I think that was the conclusion of the past, I will say, 3 meetings. That's what's going to move us forward, sustainability.
Excellent.
I'll say excited. I've never been to an eShip Summit before, so this will be my first one. So I'm excited to be able to connect with everyone and be included in this whole conversation.
Great. And I'm going to share a word that was shared with me at the Startup Champions Network by my friend Kristen. She's embracing being vulnerageous. So when you talk about inclusion and diversity, that's exactly what we're being, is vulnerageous. So thank you for being courageous in your vulnerability to have these difficult discussions. And we will look forward to seeing you in about 3 weeks. All right?
Excellent. Thanks,
Have
everyone.
a great week.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.